class last session, but this is his first Rashi class. Okay, so I don't suppose you're worried about missing Shabbat services because of snow.
Probably not. They may have a flood.
Well, they've had. I was there when there was a hurricane on Yom Kippur, so that was not particularly pleasant either. Okay, so in Eitz Chaim it begins on 3:17. 3:17.
Yeah, 3:17.
3:17. Right. All right, so Parashat Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael habaim Mitzrayim et Yaakov ish uveto ba'u. These are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. Each one, a man and his house came. Okay, so Rashi, Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael. All right, these are the names. All right, and so before we look at what Rashi says, right, what do you think is going to be his issue?
Why bother? We knew him before.
Why bother? We knew him before, right? It's superfluous detail, right? I mean,
yeah, and even each man in his household, all this is superfluous in a way.
Right. I mean, we know that they're there, right? And we know that they're there, and we know their names, right? We knew their names when they went down, and we know their names now, right? So it's superfluous, and that's one of the things that Rashi's going to point out. I mean, if something is superfluous, because presumably there's nothing superfluous in the Torah, right? I mean, God is the author. God is not a sloppy author. God has mercy on the scribes that they shouldn't have to write. I mean, I'm not joking. And also, I mean, and the longer something is, the more ink is used, the more parchment is used. It's superfluous, right? Well, obviously it can't be superfluous. So what's it coming to teach us? All right, even though he counted them by name when they were alive, he counted them again after they died. Lahodia chibatan shenim shalu lachochavim, to let us know how beloved they were. Okay, they are compared to stars. Shemotzian umachnisam b'mispar uvishmotam. God takes out and brings in by number and by name. Shene'emah, as it says in Isaiah, Hamotzi b'mispar tzeva'am lechulam b'shem yikra. He brings them out by number and name, and he brings them out by number. He brings their host out by number and gives each one a name. Okay, so yeah, it's a little opaque.
It's opaque, but this starts a couple of hundred years after. So
well,
right,
right, but we don't know that yet.
Yeah, we don't. That's right.
Right, we don't know that yet. These are the names of the sons of Jacob, right? But or the sons of Israel, rather. But the point is that I think essentially what Rashi is saying is, because of God's great love for them, he called them by name. Okay, and there is something to be said for that. I mean,
Well, the tribes.
Well,
They get
the
their names
tribes,
here.
but also, look, I will tell you. I mean, we have a small enough congregation that I pretty much know every congregant by name, right? But one of the things that will get rabbis in deep hot water is not knowing the names of their congregants.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh,
People
definitely.
get upset.
Mhm.
They feel devalued if you don't know
Even if they only
their
show up
name.
once a year.
Right? Even if especially if they only show up once a year. Right? And so there is something to be said. I think that's Rashi's point, right? That that God so loves the Israelites that he calls them by name even when it's seemingly superfluous. Right? Okay. So now verse 5. V'yehi kol nefesh yotzei yerech Yaakov, all the souls that, right, literally that came out from the loins of Jacob, right? How does this Eitz Chaim translate
The
it?
total number of
Persons that were of Jacob's issue. Okay, so that's a little bit closer than this translation, which just says those descended from Jacob, right? Because Yotzei, to issue, to go out, right? So anyway, all of those descended from Egypt were 70 souls. V'Yosef haya b'Mitzrayim. Okay. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Right? And it's hard to translate it, but I'm going to try and translate it a little bit differently so that it's more literal and you can maybe see the difficulty. All right? So all of the souls that came forth from Jacob's loins were 70. Were 70 souls, and Joseph was in Egypt.
Okay.
Right? I mean, in other words, the A part and the B part of the verse seem disconnected. Right?
Like it should be two sentences.
It should be two sentences, but more than that, right? I mean, all right.
Oh, wait.
Jacob had 70 descendants, and Joseph was in Egypt. Well,
Yeah.
but Joseph was one of Jacob's descendants. Yeah. And Ephraim and Manasseh were also Jacob's descendants. So are they counted in the 70 or are they not counted in the 70? Right? And if they are counted in the 70, then that clause is also superfluous. Right? Well, I don't care where he was. He could be in Egypt. He could be in France. He could be in Boca. I mean, it's January. He's a Jew. Why isn't he in Boca? But it doesn't matter, right? Because it's not telling us about the geography of where they are. It's telling them how many, right? And Joseph was in Egypt. So big deal. Joseph was in Egypt, right? But if Joseph isn't counted in the 70, then it's an inaccurate statement. It's not 70. It's 73, right? Joseph was in Egypt. V'halo hu uvanav hayu b'chlal shivim. Now, were not he and his sons included in the 70? What then does this teach us? Did we not know that he was in Egypt, right? I mean, this is Rashi's objection, right? If he's counted in the 70, then he's counted in the 70. Right? And why do we need to know that he was in Egypt? Right? Plus, everybody else was also in Egypt, right? This is the story of the people who went down to Egypt, right? And presumably the people who went down to Egypt were in Egypt, right? So
they were all in Egypt.
They were all in Egypt, right? So what is this telling us? All right? If you read ahead, but if you didn't read ahead, what do you think it's telling us?
I read ahead.
All right, and even if you did read ahead, what's it telling us?
That he was special.
That he was special, but in a way that he was not special,
Yeah.
right? Lahodia chatzit katosha Yosef, to show you of Joseph's righteousness. Who Yosef haroeh et son aviv, the Joseph who was the shepherd of his father's flocks. Who Yosef shahaya b'Mitzrayim, v'nasa melech v'omed b'tzidko. This is the same Joseph that was in Egypt and became the ruler, became the king, and still retained his righteousness. In other words, Joseph was in Egypt. Joseph was still Joseph in Egypt, right? The same Joseph who was a shepherd in Canaan, right? He was a shepherd in Canaan, and now he's the ruler in Egypt. He's still the same person. He's still the same person, right? That's what this text is telling us, okay? That despite the changed circumstances, he's still the same, still remains the same person. Okay. Good?
Yeah.
No.
No, not good.
But first of all, why does he call him king? Became a king.
Well,
But he was a bit number two to the Pharaoh in a way.
right.
He was co-king.
What?
He wasn't co-king, but no, it's a good line. But all right. So Melech, I mean, he was Ki'ilu. He had the power of a king.
Yeah.
Right. Even right. What does Pharaoh say to Joseph when he appoints him? He says, you will rule over Egypt, and only by virtue of me sitting on the throne will I be greater than you. Right? So he had
the power of
he had the power of a king. I agree with you. I would be happier if it said, Moshel or Shalit rather than Melech.
Uh-huh.
I agree with you. The point is he exercised royal power. Right now, of course, you could say he exercised it as an agent, right? And he didn't really have the power. He just exercised it, right? And what Pharaoh giveth, Pharaoh can taketh away, right? Which is a good segue into the next verse that we have, okay? Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada et Yosef. And there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Okay, now I should tell you that one of the things that is lovely about life in Israel is that you don't have to be super religious to know the Bible, right? It's taught in the schools. And this is a phrase that is not rare in common parlance. In other words, everything's going well for me, everything's going well, and all of a sudden I'm fired, right? Somebody says, what happened? Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef.
Okay.
Right?
I got a new boss.
I got a new boss, and he got rid of me. Right? And somebody would say that, right? And you would immediately know what that meant, right? I got a new boss, and I was gone, right? And it happens all the time. It happens all the time. I'm thinking, I don't know if she said it, but she could have. So a couple of days ago, actually it's Thursday. So yesterday, all of the political parties in Israel had to submit their lists for round 3 of the elections. Okay. And Labor and the Democratic Union have merged for this election. Okay. Because they were both fairly small parties. And this time around, I think they each got 4 or 5, and the threshold is now 3.5%. And both parties were afraid that they might not make the threshold, and therefore they would not be in the Knesset at all, and then their votes are wasted, and so on and so forth. So they combined, even though the Democratic Union is significantly further left than the Labor Party. And there's this young woman, and she's really young. She was elected to the Knesset. I mean, she's in her early 30s now, but she was elected to the Knesset a few years ago at age 29, the youngest person ever elected to the Knesset. Young woman named Stav Shafir. And she had been part of Labor, and then she left Labor and joined the Democratic Union. And then when the Democratic Union combined with Labor, she was left out. All right, she was left out. And I'm sure somebody could ask her, hey, Stav, what happened? And she could say
This phrase.
this, Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. Right? I mean, circumstances changed, and I'm out. I'm sure she's not happy about it.
Of course.
But that's what it is. Okay, so the question is, right? So a new king who didn't know Joseph, right? Well, what does that mean? Right? I mean, does it mean...
It could mean a few things. A new king arose. Was there a change in dynasty? Was there an overthrow of one and a new one comes in and didn't know what, and either didn't know or didn't want to know?
Right.
Or there was something in it there. I mean, Joseph did create an unpleasant, for the people of Egypt. He turned them into equivalent of serfs.
Right. Okay, so this is exactly the argument that Rashi is going to lead us through. Vayakom melech hadash. There arose a new king. Rav u'Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel, who are antagonists very frequently in the Gemara. Okay, they're both like 4th or 5th century Babylonian Amoraim. Okay, which means that they're later than the Mishnah. They don't appear in the Mishnah, but they appear frequently in the Gemara. Okay, and they are constantly disagreeing with each other. And Rav and Shmuel disagree. One says, Chad amar chadash mamash, v'chad amar shenitchadshu gzerotav. So one says he was really new, and the other one says his decrees were new. Okay? Meaning... Changed his mind, right? Because when you're the king, you can do that, right? I mean, I don't even have to talk about the parallels to current events. Right.
That went to my head.
Right. No, I mean, yes, it's true that there are many pictures of me and Joseph together, but I barely know the man.
Right.
Right. I take hundreds of pictures a day. Means nothing. Right? So we don't know. So that's actually where the Hebrew ends. The translation brings Rashi actually from the Gemara, Sota 11a, where I presume Rav and Shmuel, that's the locus classicus for this dispute, right? Since the Torah does not say the king of Egypt died and a new king arose, it implies that the old king was still alive, only that his policies had changed and he acted like a new king. All right. What's the Eitz Chaim say on this? Okay. who did not know Joseph. He was ignorant of or indifferent to the extraordinary service that Joseph had rendered to Egypt and the crown. No, this is the first appearance in Exodus of the verb yada, a key term in the Exodus narrative occurring more than 20 times in the first 14 chapters. The usual rendering to know hardly does justice to the richness of its meaning, which includes emotions and relatedness as well as the intellect. The use of the word here to describe Pharaoh may anticipate that you, Pharaoh, may know in 9:29. Okay. And then that's the Pshat commentary, the Drash commentary. Who did not know Joseph? Pharaoh knew that Joseph had saved Egypt, but did not care. He did not let the information change his outlook. Throughout much of Jewish history, the people's well-being depended on the goodwill of a ruler. When the leadership changed, the fortunes of the Jewish community often changed as well. Pharaoh begins by refusing to acknowledge Joseph and later to refusing to acknowledge God, saying, "Who is the Lord that I should heed him?" Asher lo yada, asa atzmo ki'ilu lo yada, right? So he acted as if he didn't know. Now, we really don't know. I mean, we really don't know because it is a couple hundred years later.
That's why, that's my question. We really don't know.
Right?
We really don't know.
Right. But it does show, I mean, to me, this is in a certain sense. I mean, and I remember a few years ago, I gave a sermon where I explored the prayer for the country.
Yes.
Right. And the classical prayer for the country is really, it's a prayer for the king, and it's not a prayer for the well-being of the country. It's a prayer asking God to ensure the benevolence of the king towards his Jewish subjects. Right. And you know, there is a difference between status that you have in society by virtue of somebody's patronage and status that you have in society as of right. And, you know, historically, we have not enjoyed status as of right. We've enjoyed it by virtue of patronage. Right. If the king liked the Jews, things were good, right? If the king didn't like the Jews, things were not good, right?
In France, when the king needed money.
Yeah. You know, and so we like to think that America is different. Right. And no, and I have to say
it has been.
It has been. And my confidence that that is really true is shaken a bit. Right. I mean, you know, the one thing that, I mean, in that sense, we are fortunate that I think the king is benevolent towards the Jews. And I, you know, people can say whatever they want, and you both know me. I mean, I very rarely have anything positive to say about him, but I absolutely do not believe he's an anti-Semite. I absolutely do not believe, I believe he does not mind pandering to anti-Semites, and he uses.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
I don't think, the only thing he cares about is himself. So
right.
Therefore, he will pander to whoever is going to do something for him.
Right. You know, but that's not enough. I mean, you know, we have to, and this is why the continued struggle for a society that is free of all prejudice is in the Jewish self-interest. Right? You can't say, well, they're just picking on the Muslims, or well, they're just picking on the gays, or well, they're just picking on the Latinos. Because, I mean, it's not just benevolence that we right? It's protecting ourselves as well.
Protecting ourselves as well.
Right.
Right.
All right. Okay. All right. Now the next is really interesting. Verse 10. Get ready. Havanit chatmalo. Get ready. Let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase, and a war befall us, and they join our enemies and depart from the land. Okay. Now. All right. So. Hava nitchat malo. Hava is, the problem here is Hava is an unusual phrase. Okay, now we know it because of the song Hava Nagila,
yeah,
right? And the Hava exactly is that. Hava Nagila means like come and let us rejoice, right? But so Hava means, Rashi says, it's an expression of preparation and readiness. Lashon hachana v'hazmana l'davarhu. Preparation and readiness. So, in other words, it's saying hazminu atzmechem l'chach. Get ready. Okay, that's what hava means, right? So that's just a grammatical point. Okay, nithach ma lo. Deal shrewdly with them. Okay. Now, what's the shorsh of nit chachma lo? This is something that you should recognize. Chacham. Right? To be
smart.
To be smart, clever, right? Yeah. Be a chacham, right? We have to act as chachamim with them. Okay? Nitchachma ma lasotla. So the pshat, the plain meaning is let us act shrewdly with regard to them. Okay? But here's the problem. Nitchachma lo. Lo means to him. Okay. It does not mean to them. Right? It should be nitchachma lahem.
For plural.
Right? Plural. But lo is singular. Okay, so here comes the drash, and Rashi is having fun. V'rabotenu darshu nitchachem lemoshian shel Yisrael. So our sages interpreted it. Let us deal shrewdly with the Savior of Israel. That's the lo, right? Okay. Because lo means him. Who's him? The Savior of Israel, meaning Moses, right? Ladunam b'mayim, to afflict them by water. All right, and that's why they throw all the firstborn sons into the Nile. Shechva nishba shelo yavi mabul le'olam, because God has already sworn that he would not bring a flood to the world. Right? In other words, it's a little hard to unpack. Yeah. But there's this idea of measure for measure. Right? There's this idea of measure for measure. And we see that. I mean, the whole 10 plagues is all measure for measure. Right? The Nile is the source of life. It's now become the vehicle of death. Yeah. Right? The frog is the god of fertility in Egypt. Okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I can't go through all 10, but there is definitely this idea of measure for measure, right? So Pharaoh is saying, well, I know God acts measure for measure, right? Because it's not that he doesn't believe in God. Right? He doesn't want to submit to God's authority, right? So he says, well, I know, right, God, how does he act? Measure for measure, right? So if I, slaughter all of the firstborn sons, God will slaughter all the firstborn of Egypt or whatever, right? But, I can throw him in the Nile because God can't do measure for measure.
Yeah.
Because he's already promised that he won't
Yeah.
flood the world.
Mm-hmm.
He promised that he is not flood the world, okay? Vehem lo hivinu sha'al kol ha'olam eino mavi, but they didn't understand that God's promise was not to flood the entire world. Aval hu mevi al uma echad. He didn't promise not to flood just one nation. Okay? I mean, it's this kind of very legalistic kind of shrewdness, right?
Yeah.
Like I mentioned in my introduction to the Haftarah this Shabbat, right? Where David is giving his deathbed instructions to Solomon, and he tells him about Shimei ben Gera, and he says, I promised I would not kill him. You know what to do, right? So Pharaoh's saying, I just throw them in the Nile and I'm clear because God says, I promised I wouldn't flood the entire world. And I'm not flooding the entire world. I'm just flooding Egypt. I didn't promise that I would do that. Right now, of course, he didn't. I mean, and where does the measure for measure come out? At the Red Sea.
Yeah.
At the Red Sea, right? I mean, Pharaoh killed Jewish children by water. And God killed Egyptians.
Right.
Egyptians. But we've been watching a lot of Australian TV lately.
Yeah.
So, right, Egyptians by water. Okay, now depart from the land. This is problematic, right? It is if you before we look at Rashi, if you look at the pshat, right, they're going to increase and a war befall us and they join our enemies and depart from the land, right? On the pshat level, this makes no sense at all, right? Because so if they're your enemies, you want them to depart from the land, right? Why wouldn't you? Right? Why wouldn't you? Self-deportation, right? Will make the life, right? So it doesn't make sense. Now you could say, well, Pharaoh didn't want them to leave, right? But he hadn't enslaved them yet, right? So where is the loss to Pharaoh if they leave? And if you're really, right, I mean, it's kind of like, it's, now having said that, regimes act this way all the time. I mean, if you look at the status of Jews in the Soviet Union, right? They were mistrusted, right? But they weren't allowed to leave, right? Well, it seems to me if you mistrust them, let them go, right? What do you want them for, right? But I'm not a dictator.
Well, yeah. But this is dictators put up walls around their country so people won't leave and let the truth out about what goes on.
Right. Against our will. But our rabbis, however, interpreted, i.e. depicted Pharaoh as a person who curses himself but ascribes his curse to others. And it is as if it were written, and we will depart from the land and they will take possession of it. Okay.
We will depart from the land and they will take possession of it, meaning the enemies?
No, in other words, he's saying that, in other words, it's projection. Right? I mean, the relevance is astonishing, right?
Oh, definitely.
Right? In other words, right? When he says he curses himself, in other words, he brings misfortune on himself
And blames
and blames others.
Oh, yeah.
Right? He brings misfortune on himself, but blames others. And therefore, when he's saying, I'm afraid that the Hebrews are going to leave, he's really afraid, I and my dynasty are going to leave. I and my dynasty are going to leave, and the Hebrews will inherit it. Right? It's
and well, we've seen it so many times with people where they can't take responsibility. They take actions. They claim that other people would do what they would do, what's in their head, but others would never think of doing it.
Right. But it's just, I mean, it sort of, it grabs you by the throat, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's pretty amazing. All right. V'cha asher ya'anu oto, and again, oto, it should be otam, right? The more they afflicted them, literally him, Cain yirbe v'Cain yifrots, thus he multiplied and thus he gained strength or spread out. V'yakutzu mipnei b'nei Yisrael, and they were disgusted, or what is this? Hey, came to dread the Israelites. Okay, they were right. So the more they oppressed them, the stronger they got, and the populace came to dread the Israelites. Now it's interesting. The more they would afflict them, the more they multiply and gain strength. Now, there are people who maintain that this is the secret of Jewish survival, right? That the more we are afflicted, the stronger we get, right? And I would maintain, despite the tremendous increases in anti-Semitism in this country in the last few years, and despite the fact that, I go around making sure doors were locked when I used to be the one, why do we have to lock doors all the time? Let people come, right? Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, I still maintain that if there's a threat to the continuity of the Jewish community in this country, it's not from anti-Semitism. It's from assimilation.
Assimilation is the biggest.
Right? Now, here's something that I learned from an African-American pastor. Mm-hmm. When I was in Norwich, we did a Freedom Seder together with the NAACP. Mm-hmm. And the pastor said to me that he thought that the egg is on this, the hard-boiled egg is on the Seder plate to symbolize this verse, right? Why? Because an egg is the only food that the more you cook it, the stronger it gets. Yeah.
That's right.
Right? I mean, I never heard this before.
No, I never think about it.
But
it's true.
It's true, right?
You don't ruin it.
Right? It gets harder. It gets harder. It gets stronger. Right? Oppression makes us stronger, right? There's a centrifugal force and there's a centripetal force. And you can't assimilate. You cannot assimilate into a society that won't have you.
Yeah, right.
Right? And this is why the Hasidim sided with the Tsar over Napoleon. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the freedom that Napoleon brought is also the freedom to assimilate.
That's right.
The freedom to walk away from the Jewish community entirely. Okay, so, there are people who maintain that the more they afflict them, the stronger they get is the secret of Jewish survival. Okay. As much as they would afflict them, in whatever way they set their heart to afflict them, so was the heart of the Holy One, blessed be He, to multiply them and to strengthen them, right? Measure for measure, right? Whatever you would afflict them with, God would do the opposite, okay? The Midrash is, the Holy Spirit says this: you, Pharaoh, say lest they multiply, but I say so they will multiply. Now, this is a play on the word Cain, right? Because, again, in Hebrew, Hebrew's not English, right? And so the same word can mean different things in different contexts, right? So now, so that means, to accurately translate Hebrew, it's not just knowing the dictionary. You have to actually know, right? So when I translate it, Ka'asher ya'anu oto kain yirbe v'chein yifrots, right? How did I translate it? Thus they did multiply, and thus they did grow stronger. But the word that I'm translating as thus is what? Cain.
Cain.
Right? Which normally means yes, right? So the more they oppressed them, yes, they did get stronger, and yes, they did multiply. So Rashi is reading the Cain quite literally, and the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, is saying to Pharaoh, you can do whatever you want, right? But I'm saying yes, right? You remember before the market crash in 2008, there was this mortgage company that always had these, every 5 minutes they're at. When other banks say no, we say yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
right?
I remember that. Yeah.
Right? Right? So Pharaoh is like that bank, okay? I mean, not Pharaoh. The Holy Spirit is like that bank, but without the crash. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead a little to 22. Okay. And Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the Nile, and every daughter you shall allow to live. Okay. All his people, he issued this decree upon them as well. On the day Moses was born, and this harks back to the business about, well, we can throw them in the Nile because God has already promised not to bring another flood, right? So the day Moses was born, his astrologers said to him, the one who will save them has been born, but we do not know whether from the Egyptians or from the Israelites. But we see that he will ultimately be smitten through water, right? So the astrologists, they have imperfect foresight, right? We've seen that the deliverer of Israel has been born today. Egyptian or Israelite, don't know. How's he going to meet his end? Water.
Water, yeah.
Water. Okay. So every son who is born, throw into the Nile. And it doesn't say, right? Again, reading this very narrow. This is every son. It doesn't say every son born to the Israelites.
He commanded to all his people.
Right. Call haben hayalud, every son that is born. Not every son that is born to the Israelites. Okay, so we're going to even throw the Hebrew sons and the Egyptian sons into the Nile. They did not know that he would ultimately suffer because of the water of Meribah, that he would not be permitted to enter the Holy Land. In other words, right, so we foresee that his destruction will come through water.
Mm-hmm. And it does.
And it does, but not the Nile, right?
Right.
So again, it's like, in any sort of intelligence gathering data,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether that's like the way spies do it or the way scientists do
Mm-hmm.
it, right? There are two separate activities. There's gathering the data and there's interpreting the data.
Analyzing the data, right?
Or analyzing the data, right? And so their data was correct.
Yeah.
Their analysis of the data or of its significance was wrong.
Wrong.
Okay. All right. Last one. She opened it, so now, right, she sees Moses floating in the teva, we call it an ark in English. It's the same word as the teva. It's the same word as the ark, like the Noah's ark, but the basket, right?
Call it a basket.
Where saw him. So she opened the basket and she saw the child, and behold, a weeping lad, and she had compassion on him, and she said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews." Okay. She saw him. Who did she see? The child.
Mm-hmm.
But the Midrash says, no, the him is actually the Shekhinah. She saw. Now, this is grammatically problematic because she saw him. Him who? Him the Shekhinah. Well, how can him who be the Shekhinah when Shekhinah is feminine?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, I guess Rashi wants to be careful with his language, so she doesn't want to say she saw God with him, right? So he says she saw the Shekhinah with him, right? Behold, he was a weeping lad, even though right, because it says Na'ar, which is a lad.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say Yeled.
No. Yeah, okay.
Nar, right? And I mean, you guys know enough Hebrew, and that's also Yiddish, nar, right? A nar, I mean, a 2-3-year-old baby is not a nar, right? It's a tinok, right? So even though he was a baby, an infant, he had the voice of a lad, of an adolescent. Okay. So his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women so that she shall nurse the child for you?" Why from the Hebrew women? She had already taken him, that is to say Pharaoh's daughter, to many Egyptian women to nurse, but he didn't nurse. Why? Because he was destined to speak with the Shekhinah, right? So Moses is like, right, I'm not drinking any of that boyish milk. Right? Only Chalav Yisrael. Right? I know that I am in the future going to be in direct contact with God. So I have to maintain my purity, and I'm only going to nurse from a Hebrew woman, not from an Egyptian woman. Okay. All right.
All right.
Gonna end a little bit early
Okay.
tonight. It's been a long day and a long week, so
Yeah.
Ricardo is a. Shall we let everybody see your beautiful face, Ricardo?
Shalom, how you doing?
Oh, he is there. Hi.
Hi.
Good to
Hi.
see you.
Yeah.
But actually, what happens is in the nights on Thursdays, I have to pick up my son. So I'm on driving mood.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Not a problem. Anyway, I'll also send you the video when I post it tomorrow, so you can go back over it. Okay.
Yes.
Laila Tov.
Laila
Slavi.
Tov.